Welcome to Zooming In Coronavirus Special. I'm Simone Gao. The number of confirmed coronavirus cases reached over 40,000 in the US, and 100 people died in a single day yesterday for the first time. Yet, China reported 2 days of zero new cases nationwide over the last week. Hubei province, the epicenter of China, reported zero new cases in the last 5 days, while the state of New York, the equivalent of Hubei province in America, reported 4,812 new cases just yesterday. What do these numbers mean? What is really happening in China? Today, my guest is former U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Robert Spalding. General Spalding, how are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thank you.
Good, thank you. So before we talk about China, I want to talk about America a little bit. I know you support the 15-day to slow the spread of the virus and then get the country back to work, right? But we know we haven't reached the peak of the pandemic. We know the numbers are still going up exponentially. So if we ease social distancing at this moment, wouldn't things get a lot worse a lot quicker before they get better?
Well, I think what I said was it is important that we understand that the country is very diverse in terms of population density, and looking at the United States just through the lens of New York City, which is a very, very dense population, is probably not the right approach for the United States. And so what I'm in favor of is a phased return to work after the 15 days that really represents and looks at the United States as a very diverse geographical and population dense country. It's a very large country. It's different than China. There's a lot of people are using the example of China and what they did, but China has 50 cities of at least 2 million in population or more, where they're very dense. And having lived there, the character of the United States is just not the same as China. And so I think we ought to take an approach that really fits the United States and also takes into account the most vulnerable for this, CCP virus that I like to call it. I think the other thing that people need to understand and is part of this effort is that the CCP virus is with us permanently now, because the Chinese Communist Party allowed it to escape from Wuhan and really infect the world. So the global pandemic is a result of their secrecy and control and effort to hide and obfuscate the truth. And of course, we're dealing with it now because of that. But at the same time, we're a different country. We have a different system. We have a diverse population and geography, and we ought to, have a nuanced approach based on the fact that we are different.
So you basically are agreeing with our president that basically we can do the two things at the same time, containing the epidemic while saving the economy. I think on the other hand, people are worried that, we still haven't seen the peak of this pandemic, and the numbers are still growing exponentially. So if we ease social distancing right now, don't you think that number will accelerate even more?
Well, most of the epicenter is in New York City, so it's probably prudent that we delay going back to work maybe a little bit longer in that very dense area. But the rest of the country is not accelerating at the same pace that New York City is, and so we ought to take an approach based on what the situation demands. We don't have to keep the entire country closed down because New York City is experiencing a continuing increase in the number of patients. That being said, also Governor Cuomo basically said that he's concerned that he's going to lose 1 to 2% of the population of New York, which I think is scaring people and really doesn't really meet any of the actual data that's been collected. So to actually achieve the numbers that he essentially stated on TV, we would have to see a 100% infection rate of the 20 million people that live within the 5 boroughs. And that is just not consistent with any of the data that we've seen. And so I think there's a lot of hype, and a lot of this hype is actually scaring people into thinking that this is far more dangerous than it actually is. A lot of the models too, the assumptions based in the models are kind of the worst case scenario. And so people are using these numbers like 2 million dead in the United States to really terrify the population. And I think it's really irresponsible to do that. I think we do know that we've lost, I think, 3 million jobs. People have been laid off just in the time that we've had the country closed down. So we are going to have, and potentially could have, an economic depression created by our response. And so we have to take a balanced and measured approach, both in looking at the actual data as we deal with the virus itself, but also we have to keep in mind that people are losing their jobs, and this is going to affect their ability to feed their families, to have housing. This is a very big social disruption for the United States. And quite frankly, I could think of no better way for the Chinese Communist Party to sow chaos and disaster than what they've done in terms of, essentially trying to convince people that they're not culpable for the coronavirus, but that we are, the United States is. So there's a lot going on here that we need to keep in mind and understand that there's a lot to be gained by our adversaries in terms of how we deal with the crisis, and particularly if we don't deal with it in a way that is considerate of both the economic damage that can be created, but also taking care of the patients as they become ill.
Let's talk about China. We talk about the numbers. We know the numbers coming out of China. 0 new cases in China for several days. And I know because of the total lockdown of the country, the epidemic there should be calming down. That's understandable. But 0 new cases in the entire country? We have seen reports from China that patients were discharged from the hospitals when still showing symptoms, and CT scans still showing lung infections and stuff. So what should we make of the numbers coming out of China?
Well, I don't think you can trust anything coming out of the Chinese Communist Party. And so, in fact, I think it's irresponsible to report on any numbers coming out of China, because we know that the Chinese Communist Party is disingenuous, and it obfuscates, and it actually doesn't it's never been known to be transparent with regard to its data. And in fact, it treats data as a national security issue. So I think that we just ought to discount anything coming out of the Chinese Communist Party.
I think the big question is, if China were to have a second outbreak, do you think the world would even know that?
Well, I mean, it depends on whether or not the Chinese Communist Party wants to let them know that. I think they're more than willing to hide and more than capable of hiding things. That's part of the effort to kick U.S. reporters out of the country so that they can control all of the media coming out of the country, and so they can control what media is given to their own population.
Just a few days ago, Secretary Pompeo said in a press briefing at the State Department regarding China's early cover-up. And he said the spread, this is his quote. He said the United States will do the after action. Okay, let me do this again. So he said the United States will do the after action when the timing is right. So what did he mean by that exactly? What after action could the U.S. take?
Well, I think what we need to do is go back and kind of reassess our supply chain. We need to reassess our relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. We ought to reassess how we deal with propaganda, and particularly how we do public diplomacy in this country. Across every line of effort that the federal government touches, and how we measure national power, whether it be economic or financial or trade or investment, or information media or politics, any of those areas, we need to very strictly look at the aftermath of not just the global pandemic that the Chinese Communist Party started. Because think about this, we are going to have to learn to figure out how do we prevent the spread of a global pandemic from a totalitarian regime which is not actually willing to prevent it from spreading to the rest of the world. And right now, the Chinese Communist Party is taking advantage of it by trying to create this market dominance and reliance on their supply chain as a result of the aftermath of the crisis caused by the global pandemic that they caused. So they use this as an opportunity to advance their own interests. So we have to take all of that into account. It may be the case that we can't trust flights coming in or to or from China, that we can't trust, and that they must transit a third country or some other area where we have an ability to prevent them from coming into the country if there's a potential, illness. So a lot of people left Wuhan right around the time that the Chinese Communist Party was saying that there's no evidence of human-to-human transfer. And so they knew back then that there was evidence of human-to-human transfer, yet they let those people get on airplanes and trains and leave Wuhan. So this is something where we're going to have to do a full investigation and report on how this played out, how the Chinese Communist Party used it to take advantage, in all the ways that's detailed in the book Unrestricted Warfare by the two PLA colonels. And then we're going to have to figure out how we protect this country, and then we're going to have to share that with our allies and partners, because we can't protect the United States if the Chinese Communist Party is using our allies and partners as a proxy to get to us.
Do you think the U.S. government will even take legal actions against the CCP? I mean, these remarks by Secretary Pompeo was made on the occasion when he was talking about the early cover-up of the CCP, of the epidemic, and the impact on the world, on the whole world. And we know Congressman Jim Banks is introducing this legislation to hold the CCP accountable for the early cover-up. So I was wondering if when Secretary Pompeo said we will take after actions when time is right, when the timing is right. So I was wondering if that implies legal actions.
Well, I don't know if it's legal action or just the idea that we're going to take action to get reparations for the $2 trillion recovery package that we're having to do now and all of the deaths and destruction as a result of the global pandemic. I think definitely the Chinese Communist Party needs to be held to account, and they have to make reparations because they let this get out from Wuhan. They knew that they needed to stop it, but they tried to hide it and cover up. And the Chinese Communist Party is culpable. They're not just culpable for the deaths in America, they're culpable for the deaths in Italy and the UK and elsewhere around the world. So there's going to be not just the United States that wants to hold them accountable. Many countries around the world are going to want to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for the dead and the economic devastation wrought by their behavior.
Do you think the president should still put a lot of emphasis on the phase one trade deal with China? Because I think he still talks about it, and he even said, phase two is going to start very soon. Do you think the phase one trade deal will even hold?
No, I don't believe the phase one trade deal will hold. I think the coronavirus is going to cause them to have to reconsider how they abide by the terms of the phase one trade deal. So I think that's the other shoe that's going to drop.
Okay, so there's not going to be phase two if that happens.
No, absolutely not. There was not going to be a phase two before the CCP virus. I think it's clear that it's not going to happen now.
And nobody cares about the trade deal right now anymore, right? Everyone's focus is...
No, we just want to get the economy back started. Of course, protect the citizens, but we need to get the economy back going because people are being laid off, and it could be that we see tens of thousands of businesses close if we don't get the economy back up and running.
Mm-hmm. And after this pandemic, do you think, do you think this pandemic will push the supply chain out of China even faster?
Most definitely. I think that was already happening. It's just going to accelerate now. I think we're going to use the Defense Production Act and tariffs and all kinds of other incentives and disincentives to force corporate America to reshore manufacturing. We can no longer rely on the Chinese Communist Party to provide things to us that are of critical need in times of crisis or national security.
I know even before the pandemic started, you have been advocating the U.S. businesses should move out of China. They should look for other places for supply chains. But what were their difficulties back then?
Well, because we've had a policy in this country of allowing Chinese companies to take advantage of our system and allowing U.S. corporations to offshore manufacturing to take advantage of lax labor regulations and lax environmental regulations in China. And I think a lot of the rules, the way they're set up, whether they be accounting rules or whether they be the rules at the Securities and Exchange Commission that allow our retirement funds to be invested in Chinese corporations, that all of these result in lost capacity and lost capital to China to invest in China for manufacturing and infrastructure. And essentially, we need to cut off those incentives and create disincentives so that investment actually flows into the United States to help rebuild manufacturing and infrastructure. And then we need to take U.S. Government money and invest in R&D like we did during the Cold War so that we can, rebuild the technological superiority that we had back then.
Okay. So this pandemic will definitely speed up that process.
Yes, definitely.
That's all my questions, General. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I just would like to say that we have a great future ahead of us. All we need to do is seize the opportunity that's in front of us. We've been handed a very difficult challenge, but at the same time, we have clear sight now to see how dangerous this relationship is with the Chinese Communist Party and what we need to do to actually begin to move back manufacturing and invest in our infrastructure and in our people and in science and technology. And then finally, to secure Americans' data, to build an encrypted internet for the American people that protects them from the predatory behavior of Russians and the Chinese Communist Party. So we have a great opportunity in front of us. Now all we need to do is go out and take advantage of it and do like we've done over the 240 years of our existence.
All right. Thank you so much, General. That's it for today's coronavirus special. You are watching Zooming In with Simone Gao. Also, please download our podcast on Spotify, iTunes, and Google. And be sure to come back tomorrow.